Make kaleidoscope blocks using the Westalee Kaleidoscope tools. The important thing to remember when choosing your fabric is the repeat. This fabric repeats across the fabric and up and down the fabric. It's about 2.5 to 3 inches between each repeat across the fabric, and it's about 6 inches up and down the fabric. So I can cut a lot of the same kaleidoscope from this fabric. This fabric here is a beautiful fabric for making kaleidoscopes. I can either cut using the lines as part of my design, I could use this line as my design, or I can use the whole flower section. I can cut with the stripes going through the centre of the block this way, or I can just use the flower this way. This fabric here makes beautiful kaleidoscopes, but the pattern only repeats about twice every 90 centimetres. So for an 8-point block, I would need approximately 4 metres of fabric to make one block. So you need to look at the repeat in the fabric when purchasing your fabric. This fabric here makes beautiful kaleidoscopes, and it repeats across the fabric every 5 or 6 inches, and it repeats about every 12 inches in the length of the fabric. This fabric here will make beautiful kaleidoscope blocks. You could use the flower here, you could use the wisteria here, you could use the butterfly. This fabric repeat is twice in 90 centimetres, so you need to make beautiful kaleidoscope blocks, and we're going to use this border print today. Using this fabric to make a kaleidoscope block, I can choose many different portions of the fabric to make my wedges. For instance, I can use through here, I could bring it up and it's highlighting this portion here. I could also use taking the curves in. So you can pick and choose whichever portion of the fabric you like to use. The next step I need to do is to cut strips of fabric. The strips will measure from here to here. And I will always cut my strips for kaleidoscopes slightly larger than what I need. I don't use a ruler to cut those pieces by measurement. I use the fabric to give me a guide. I'm going to take the point here, and this point repeats across the fabric. I will use that point as a guide . The first straight edge, I will determine which piece I am using and just pick a point slightly above that. So I will pick the points of these flowers here to give me the straight line to cut the strip. So I will just put the ruler edge to that point of the flowers and to the point on the next piece. And now I can cut the strips of fabric that wide. And I will continue across the fabric. Once I have cut the fabric strips to the right size, I will then bring the guide of the tool to the edge of the fabric and check to see how straight the fabric print is. I require this print to be straight to get my points to line up around the block. This fabric is lining up beautifully. If I had chosen this fabric to use, when I put the guide to the edge of the fabric and line up the base with the point here, you can actually see that that centre point of each print is moving across to the left. If I was to cut my pieces with the fabric like this, I could not match my print pieces in my seams. So what I do is I will then spray starch the fabric, and while it is damp, I will use a straight ruler and I will slightly move my fabric, twisting the fabric until I get that line to run straight through, so that I can cut the pieces and have them sew accurately. To cut the wedges, I will just put the guide to the edge of the fabric and I will move the tool until I'm in the centre of the piece that I wish to cut. I can use the points of the fabric as references, and I will just cut up one side. Always cut your kaleidoscopes where you want to match points individually. As you can see, there is a bit of fabric between each of my kaleidoscopes, I like to make sure that the patterns join at the lines at the seams. So I will use a lot of pins in this process. It's worth the effort. I will align the pieces together at the bottom, then put a temporary pin at the base. I will then, using a pin, make sure that as I pin the pieces together, the lines are meeting. And I will continue to do that with all. Now that I've stitched a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance, I have pressed the seams on 2 of the units towards the corner triangle and on the other 2 units towards the wedge. I've sewn the pieces together. I will press the seam allowance so that it is pressing away from the corner triangle, and I will trim all the dog ears off. So my seam allowance is going away from the corner triangle. The next thing I will do is open out that seam allowance, and I will trim a portion of the seam allowance from underneath away. This is a very important step to help you to achieve flat centres. By taking out a portion of this seam allowance, I reduce the bulk in the centre of the quilt. Now you can see I have 4 units to piece together. I will sew these 2 units together, and then I will sew these 2 units together. Then I will